Welcome to Candid Catholic Convos, a program brought to you by the Catholic Diocese of Harrisburg. Our mission is to humanize the Church and help you to grow in your faith, love, and understanding. I'm your host, Rachel Trochet, a cradle Catholic who's only human and struggled with faith on more than one occasion. Each week, you'll hear engaging, down-to-earth interviews and actionable strategies you can implement into your life with ease to help you grow closer to God. If you're ready to open your heart and step fully into the person God created you to be, then you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hello. Welcome to this week's episode of Candid Catholic Convos. It's 4th of July weekend, a celebration of our country's independence that we recognize with food, fun, fireworks, and friends. I always loved a good fireworks display, but now as a military spouse, this day that's steeped in history has a whole new meaning for me. It never really occurred to me that the amount of sacrifice it took to get our country to where it is now. All those soldiers just felt like numbers on a page, but all those numbers are actually people like my husband, who give up their time, their bodies, and sometimes their lives to ensure that we can live freely. There's a saying among military spouses, especially when times are uncertain: boots on the ground is a terrifying phrase when you have skin in the game. And that really hits home this time of year. Thankfully, my husband returned home, but the cost of war is one we still live with every day, just like hundreds of thousands of military families across the country and the world. Our service members are asked to do and see things that many of us civilians can't even fathom. I will never know the full extent of what my husband saw or did overseas, but I do know that it rocked his faith. And according to the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, the suicide rate among U.S. veterans currently outpaces combat deaths at a staggering 4-1. So how can we minister to those who are called to sacrifice for the rest of us, who come home with injuries that are sometimes invisible, who can no longer see the intersection of faith and patriotism? Today, I have the honor of speaking with Father William Barbee, pastor at both St. Joseph and Immaculate Conception of the Blessed Virgin Mary in Berwick, as well as a former Army chaplain who served in Germany, Korea, Texas, South Carolina, and eventually the Carlisle Barracks. His vast experience and incredible journey has led him to creating a rich community steeped in the Catholic faith and military service devotion. Father Barbee, welcome to Candid Catholic Convos. I'm really excited to have you here to talk about this really important topic and, in my own personal opinion, but I'm a little biased. So welcome.
Well, thank you. And thank you for inviting me.
So for those who maybe haven't met you in the diocese yet, can you talk to me a little bit about your journey from serving as a chaplain to now being a parish pastor?
Okay. Serving as a chaplain and how I got to be a parish pastor in the Catholic Church are really all kind of connected. I began in the Church of Christ, and during that process, as a minister, and during that process, I went to a graduate school of theology for a Master of Divinity. And in that, through church history, now keep in mind, I'm a Church of Christ, taking a course in church history at a Baptist school, and that started me down the road. And the richness of the history led me in the direction of trying to go back to the church. And in the military, so I joined the Army in 1987 as a chaplain. I found myself in Panama. My family was still at Fort Leonard Wood, and a friend of mine from Fort Leonard Wood was in Honduras. And I would go frequently from Panama to Honduras for temporary duty, and he and I would sit up at night. And this was Jonathan Shaw, Chaplain Jonathan Shaw, endorsed by Missouri Synod Lutheran churches. And Jonathan has a very keen mind and loves to talk about theology. So for some reason, that's what we talked about a lot. When I got back to Fort Leonard Wood, I went in to see the priest, Father Bud Mulvaney, another good friend of mine. And I said, Bud, I think maybe God wants me to be Lutheran. And he said, no. He said, all roads lead to Rome, but go through Canterbury, not Augsburg. And I really laughed. I thought, none of this is going to be possible anyway. Well, within about a couple of years, I was now working toward being ordained in the Episcopal Church. So that happened in the 90s, and
90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s, and 90s
I continued serving as a chaplain, as endorsed by the Episcopal Church. But I still had that kind of desire, something was more. And all my friends, chaplain friends, were Catholic. I was drawn to them more than anyone else. So anyway, I got to Carlisle in 2012, Carlisle Barracks, Pennsylvania, and was going to daily mass, and they started a RCIA, and I asked my wife, "Would you go with me?" And she said, "I'll go for you." And I said, "Well, that's great. Come for me, but I'd also like you to go for you." But she got really drawn to the Catholic Church, and we went actually through twice, 2 years. And then I was received into the church, Pentecost 2015, and started a process called pastoral provision, and that's quite a process. It was started by John Paul II in 1980. So I went through that process. I was ordained to the priesthood in October of 2020. And now I'm in Berwick as pastor of St. Joseph and St. Mary's, and all of it kind of, I guess it's God's plan. If I had not been in the Army, I would not have been exposed to the good Catholic chaplains, which would have, I don't know where it would have led me otherwise, but maybe God would have done it in another way.
I love what that chaplain said to you about how all roads lead to Rome. Because like you said, if this was his plan, then you would have found your way there one way or the other, but he exposed you to these good Catholic chaplains. And it's funny that you say Fort Leonard Wood. My husband did his basic training there, and he used to joke that they called it Fort Lost in the Woods.
Yes.
So anytime somebody says Fort Leonard Wood, I'm like, oh, Lost in the Woods.
Well, I don't know when he went through basic training, but I was a battalion chaplain for basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, starting in September of '87.
Oh, wow. Yeah, he went through in 2014.
Oh, well, yeah.
So I think... But you mentioned you were a chaplain in the military. When you enlisted, I guess, or are chaplains considered officers?
Officer, yeah, I was commissioned, direct commission as a chaplain.
Okay, that was going to be my question was, did you go in as a chaplain or did you have another job before deciding or becoming a chaplain?
No, I was always a chaplain.
Awesome. So we have Independence Day coming up, and I know patriotism means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, especially in today's world. But for you personally, what does Independence Day mean, especially as somebody who's served both the spiritual and emotional needs of those in uniform as well as out of uniform?
Well, looking back at the history, so very much touched by the thoughtfulness of our founders, that it was something that they came together and came up with a way to get there. And also it was a way that all of them risked their life, their liberty, their property, everything to go down that road. And I was so honored a few years back on Veterans Day to lay a carnation at the grave of our first Commander-in-Chief, General and President Washington.
That's amazing. That must have been quite the experience.
It was. Yeah.
So have you noticed in your, I guess, times of service, I know that my husband, for instance, has almost like a clash, or for him especially, there is a very deep intersection of faith and patriotism, but at times it also feels like they're at odds with each other. How do you see patriotism and faith sort of intersecting?
Well, faith comes first, and faith can inform our patriotism, that it's not just a blind patriotism. But, also in the military, we do take an oath to uphold the Constitution and obey lawful orders. Now, that, for some people in some circumstances, may come into conflict what is a lawful order. Those are probably best informed by military advocates, military lawyers, attorneys, of what is lawful and not just an individual saying, well, I don't think that's lawful.
It almost reminds me of that movie, Hacksaw Ridge, about the soldier who did not want to kill anybody because it was against his beliefs. And he made it out of the war without firing a single shot, which I always thought was pretty inspiring. And it's a pretty darn good movie.
Yeah, you know what? I heard a lot about it, but for some reason I never saw it.
Yeah, it's one of those you definitely have to be in the mood to watch it, but it is a very powerful and impactful movie. And speaking of faith and serving, I know that that's the main topic of this, but did your faith inform your decision to serve?
The short answer is yes. Again, I had the faith first, although it was at the time when I joined in the context of the Church of Christ, but I had the faith and also had the desire to serve in that manner. I saw it was something I could do and something I was in some way drawn to do. I
love that. It's you mentioned earlier about how the Army led you to this exposure with Catholic priests. So it's like looking back, you can see God's plan the whole way through. And I think that that's fascinating. We might not know when we're in it, but when we look back, you can see the path. We're like, oh, I get it now.
Yeah. And that is one great aspect about the military, and my experience was Army, but all the different denominations, people that are endorsed by different religious groups, and coming together. And I actually learned a lot from many different faiths. When I was at Fort Jackson on the school faculty, our chaplain school faculty, we always had an imam and we always had a rabbi. And if I was going to be doing a homily from an Old Testament text, I would always go in and sit down with the rabbi and talk about it. And actually it was a couple of different rabbis because, personnel changes. But talking with the rabbi about a passage from the Old Testament, you get a perspective that you will never find in a commentary that's been written by Catholic or Protestant.
That's fascinating. And that's what a great use of resources in bridging the gap between these two faiths. Now, I know that, the military has a multitude of different people from a variety of backgrounds. I'm sure there are a lot of Christians, but I'm sure there are also a lot of atheists or those of different beliefs or those who are agnostic. But as a chaplain, I'm assuming here, but that your job wasn't just to minister to those who were Protestant, or when you became Catholic, it wasn't just to the Catholics; it was to everybody. How were you able to navigate and balance so that you could minister to all?
We have limitations on things that we can or cannot do from our background, who we are endorsed by. And let me pause there for a moment. Every military chaplain has to have an endorsement from a recognized religious group of some kind, whether it's a Protestant denomination, Orthodox, Catholic, Jewish. Somebody has to endorse them and has to be authorized to endorse them. So that comes with limitations. A rabbi cannot do necessarily what cannot do the sacraments that a Catholic priest could do. But what we all try to do is either perform. A request is made, can I do this? Yes. Then I perform it. Then maybe the answer is no, I can't do that. But then I provide it. I go and find the chaplain that can do it to provide that service. And that I encountered that early on back to Fort Leonard Wood. Early on, we had a company commander, a captain. He was Jewish, had a baby. And so I got the person from St. Louis, a couple hours away, to come and provide the religious service of a newborn male child, the brisk, and I attended it, but I couldn't do it, but it was provided.
That's wonderful. It goes back to, being able to, in the creative world and in film, they used to say it's not about what you know, it's who you know. And, being able to know and have that connection with all these different chaplains of all these different faiths. It's like you said, like, I might not be able to do it, but I can find someone who can.
Mm-hmm. And may I go back to interacting with different faiths, and especially you mentioned atheists, and I had many encounters with atheists, and actually I found them all very fascinating and productive. I found just every one of them to be ethical people who had thought out arguments for their beliefs or non-beliefs, and had many discussions with them, and very polite discussions. One of them, for example, he was our personnel officer. We call them S1. This was Fort Sill. Our brigade personnel officer was atheist, and from time to time I would be in his office. We would have short discussions, not anything too long. But one day he asked me a question that caught me a little off guard. He said, Chaplain, there's not much difference between you and me. You're almost as atheist as I am. I'm thinking, what? And he said, yeah. He said, there's 30,000 religions out there. You deny all of them but one. I just deny one more than you do. Well, had to think on that one a little bit. But out of that relationship, wasn't long after that, 2 a.m, I get a call from him, and his wife's in the emergency room. That and many other things like that were great memories and experiences.
Yeah, I can imagine it's pretty powerful to say that you had that type of impact. And I'm sure you've ministered to not only people of all different faiths, but to those who have experienced traumatic military encounters. From that, what has your experience been from not only ministering to them, but then having to return to the civilian church? I know a lot of soldiers say that it's almost jarring, like being an immigrant in a foreign land, even though everything is very familiar, to go from combat to calm. And when you've seen some terrible things or experienced some terrible physical injury or a moral injury, having to, quote unquote, go back to normal can be very difficult. So talk to me about what your experience has been bridging that gap for these soldiers.
Well, my experience was more while still on active duty, returning from combat, soldiers returning from combat, and now back in CONUS, United States of America, living still in the Army, but also dealing with, I'm not in combat anymore, but what do I do? And for most, it's really, they have a way of working it out, and they do. For some, it's a little more of a struggle. And for example, while at Fort Sill, that's also a basic training environment. And it was very common that, NCO was taken out immediately from returning from combat to give them a break, let them be a drill sergeant. Now, think about that for a moment. Drill sergeant is a very, very stressful position to have, to be in. The hours are horrendous. The expectations are high. And it's just a very stressful environment. And we had many of them getting into problems because of that. So we started talking about, look, if you need help, get help. And we will help you get help. Do it before you get to the point of now you have to. And I know one kind of senior NCO on the drill sergeant trail, we would call it. He did come back and he said, I went in. Well, it was for substance abuse. And he said everyone in the waiting room was there by referral. They had to go. He went before he had to, before he got in trouble.
One of the things I try to teach my kids is the bravest thing you can do is to ask for help. And I feel like as soldiers, you know, I see it in my husband, I see it in the men that he works with and the women, that they think that they can just white knuckle it because asking for help is weak, when in fact it is, again, one of the bravest things I think you can do. And given that most of the wounds that soldiers endure are invisible, it's terrifying. I read a statistic from the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs that the suicide rate among veterans currently outpaces combat deaths at a staggering 4-to-1 ratio. And in an area that has a lot of active duty and retired veterans, because we have so many in this area alone, with all the active bases and then those who have served and have now retired. How are you ministering to those now that you're retired? And what about for those of us who haven't been trained in pastoral ministry? How can we let them know that again, the bravest thing you can do is to ask for help?
Well, the situation I'm in now, the location, there's not that overwhelming number of veterans like you might find right outside the gate of a large installation. But we do have some. And again, most of them, their experience has been years and years in the past. But that can also come back even after years and manifest itself even after years. I do have from time to time someone come in and we talk about their experience. And usually it's just talking. And then if they need more help, it's referring, and pretty much they already know where they can get help. It's just that encouragement. I had much more experience while still on active duty of having those kinds of conversations, and people would come in, very high-ranking NCOs, sometimes even officers would come in and from their experience, and often it was a very negative experience they had in combat, just to talk, and then, if they need help, go get it. And sometimes it was just they want to talk. Maybe they want to pray. And many times it was over having taken a life.
I can't even imagine how that must. I have a hard time killing a fly. I can't imagine having to go into a combat situation and say, well, it's either me or this other person who wants to kill me. It's absolutely terrifying. Given that you've seen these men and women who have been through absolutely unthinkable situations and lived to tell about it, what has your service as a chaplain taught you about human resilience and suffering, but most of all, hope?
Oh, yeah, never give up hope. In fact, at one time, I did carry a business card, the kind you print out yourself. And that's what I had on the bottom was, name and contact information, that kind of thing. And then at the bottom, agent of hope. So hope is always in anything a lifeline.
What a great idea, an agent of hope in a business card. That's brilliant. I love that.
So resilience, the human spirit is extremely resilient and can come back from incredible things.
Something I have to remind myself about resilience is that I always thought that resilience was just like innate. And what I found, even though I'm a spouse and I've never actually served in combat, but resilience to me is having been broken, but then putting yourself back together and realizing that you're still whole in some way. You might have a couple dings and bruises and cracks, but that doesn't mean that you're not still you and that you're not unworthy in the eyes of God. Does that make sense? I don't even quite know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. No, it absolutely makes sense. And, that's especially taking a life that leaves an indelible mark on the soul. And it's not just me saying that and observing that. Pope Francis actually said that in a talk he gave to military chaplains in Europe.
Yeah, it's again, it's something that I can't, and I'm sure a lot of people who have never served can't, it's something that we can't truly imagine. How, now, given your extensive experiences in the military, how has that shaped how you approach ministry now, especially since you've gone from a Christian denomination to Catholic, and not just Catholic, but you're an ordained priest?
First of all, I would say, no matter what, you just take people where they are, and you rely on more than yourself. You can't get water out of an empty well, so you have to tend to that as well. And every journey is different.
Now, would you say that your experiences have strengthened your faith or tested your faith? Like how has all of that led you to where you are now in being secure in your faith?
Yes, tested and strengthened, and not always easy. But at the end, I would say strengthened, definitely tested.
Are there things that you have learned in the military that you believe the civilian church could benefit from? And if so, what do you think those would be?
Yes, I think there's a gratitude having seen and been a part of. There's a gratitude on my part for those who are doing that now. It's incredible. Well, as a spouse, even spouses give an incredible sacrifice.
So what message would you want to leave with our listeners, especially those who are younger or maybe struggling with their faith, or, especially those who are still in uniform? What would you want to leave them with regarding faith and service and love of country?
Okay. I would say prayer. Pray for those who are serving, pray for our country, and to those who are on active duty, pray for those that you are serving.
I love that. Well, Father Barbee, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for your service, and thank you for everything that you continue to do for the church. And I hope you have a wonderful 4th of July.
Thank you, and you the same, and God bless America.
Thank you so much for listening. Our goal at the Diocese of Harrisburg is to walk with you on your faith journey. So if this episode resonated with you in any way, the easiest way to show your appreciation is by sharing this program with your network or by leaving a review on your listening platform. You can also support us financially by making a donation online at hbgdiocese.org/DAC and clicking the Make a Donation button. Thanks again, and we'll see you at church on Sunday.